this morning, I'm going to encourage you to open up to the second chapter of the book of James in the New Testament. James chapter 2. And what we're going to be talking about this morning from James chapter 2 is the haves and the have-nots. The haves and the have-nots. And so that's what this section of chapter is all about. So James chapter 2, we're going to read a couple verses in just a moment. I don't know if you ever found yourself in a situation where you've walked into a room and felt not only judged, but you felt that people have kind of put you off, or people have kind of cast you aside or tossed you aside, maybe because of your race, and if that's the case, that's unfortunate. Maybe because of your gender. Maybe because of the way that you were dressed or the way that you looked. And so you're in that situation and you're in that scenario. And sometimes you just get a sense that as people sort of have taken a quick glance at you, taken a quick look at you, that they've sort of sized you up. And their instant impression is, they're of no help. They're of no value. They couldn't possibly fit into our culture. They couldn't possibly fit at our work. I don't know if you've ever felt yourself in a situation where because of something like the way that you dress or the way that you look or something like that people have automatically, it seems, within just a couple of moments, written you off or written you out of the occasion. And of course, the opposite happens too, as we walk into places and connect with people. Sometimes there's an instant connection, or people instantly like us because of the way that we talk, or the way that we act, or the way that we dress. And there's a sense sometimes where people are like, you know what, I think you're going to fit here. We'll welcome you here. We'll make sure, go out of our way to make sure that you're welcomed. We will go the extra mile. To make sure that you feel loved and cared for, because you are, as best we can tell anyway, you are like us. You are like us. And then those times where you sort of walk into those spaces and you feel ignored, you feel put out, you feel like people aren't really putting their best foot forward because already they believe because of something about you, they've dismissed your presence in that meeting or that room or that school or that church. I remember quite a few years ago now, when we lived in Woodstock area, we were really close to a border town, Holton. And so it was a lot cheaper to get things shipped to Holton, and there was places that you could go, and Holton was in the USA, and you could go and pick things up there and bring them across the border, smuggle them across the border, And it was just really, really convenient. And so once in a while, not a lot, once in a while I would do that with different things that we wanted to purchase. And so oftentimes, just because of convenience, I would go over in my work clothes. And at the time, I was working in a steel shop. And if you know anything about steel, if you've worked around it, been around it a lot, it is just grimy and dirty, and it's just a terrible, not a very clean work environment. And so, if your sparks are flying at you from different equipment, and sometimes your clothes will get holes in them, along the sleeves and stuff. And so it just wasn't made sense for me to go home and change and things, and so I wasn't really seeing anybody or doing anything. And so sometimes if I had to go over, I'd just hop in the car and then head over the border. And after a bit, one of the things that I seemed to notice is that every time I was there, they kept pulling me to the side, and they check my car and they look underneath, and they bring the dogs out and take scans of it. And they just went the whole 9 yards, to make sure that I was I guess it wasn't that honest looking at the time, but just to check every detail before they would let me into the States. And then they didn't seem to have the same problems getting back into Canada. But that's just the way it was. And so after a few times, I just started noticing this, and I was like, wow, it's really a pain because it takes an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes. and things. And so what I started doing is kind of clued into me, is I would take some clean clothes with me to work that day if I knew I was going over. And then from work, I would change in my clean clothes and then comb back my hair and make sure it was nicely styled and everything. And then I would go over. And what I noticed is when I was a little bit more cleaned up and a little, more handsome and things, they didn't pull me over nearly as much. In fact, it hardly ever happened, and it went from like almost every time I went over, I'd get pulled aside because at least what I felt was the way I was dressed, and it was kind of dirty and old clothes and things. And then when I cleaned up pretty nice and I put on some nicer things, I didn't seem to have any problems getting across into the United States, and then I was always anxious to get back into Canada on the other side of things. You probably found yourself in a situation where, at least from your point of view, you felt like people dismissed you because of the way that you dressed, or the way, the kind of clothing you wore, or something like that. And James addresses this in James chapter 2. We're going to put this passage up on the screen for you here. James chapter 2, he begins to address this issue with a congregation of some kind that he's writing to. And I want you to notice what James says this morning. He says, "My brethren, do not hold your faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ with an attitude of personal favoritism. For if a man comes into your assembly with a gold ring and dressed in fine clothes, and there also comes a poor man in dirty clothes, and you pay special attention to the one who is wearing the fine clothes, and say, 'You sit here in a good place,' and you say to the poor man, 'You stand over there,' or 'Sit down there by my footstool,' have you not made a distinction among yourselves and become judges with evil motives? Listen, my brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Did they not blaspheme the fair name by which you have been called? If, however, you are fulfilling the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well." And so James is writing to the congregation here, and he points out something, he picks out something that apparently he's aware has been happening, or at least had the potential to happen. Maybe it was happening some other places. Most likely he knew about some instances where this was taking place to those that he is writing to. And his argument is pretty simple, and you probably picked up on it already in just the verses we read without jumping too much into it. But James is noticing that there's a difference in the way that the assembly, the church, those Christians gathered in the name of Jesus are treating certain people as they come in for a time or a place, a gathering of worship. And he says, imagine now a man comes into your assembly with a golden ring. And instantly what happens is that man walks in, we would do the same thing, we all do the same thing, is we make a judgment. You see a man and he walks in, he has a gold ring and he has fine clothes, and we make a judgment. And it's not so much that the judgment is bad, that's just natural. We say, well, here's a man that is doing quite well. Here's a man who is secure financially. Here's a man that is wealthy. Here's a man that has the best of the best. And so James says you make a judgment, or you show partiality towards him as he walks in. And you take him and escort him to the honor seat in your congregation. And in those days, often in the front of wherever they were meeting, there would be special seats that are kind of like this one here, although it's not very honorable because I sit in it. But anyway, they would have special seats in the front, and that's where all the important people sat. And so, you're rich, you're well-to-do, your guests, those who work for the government, they would were being escorted to the front of the church. And so everyone would be sitting there, and everybody would know instantly as you walked into any congregation the who's who that was there that day. And so James is saying, now just imagine that the guy walks in and instantly your usher picks up on it, everybody that's around picks up on it. This is somebody that is okay. This is somebody that is doing well. This is somebody that we want to go the extra mile for. This is somebody who could really be an asset to our church. This is somebody that has a lot to offer us. In fact, we don't want to upset him. We don't want to offend him. We don't want to make him uncomfortable. And so you just take him and you march him right up into the honor seat. You put him by the most important people in your church where everyone can sort of sit back and just notice and look and gawk and say, here is somebody of importance. Now, the honor seats in today's churches and Baptist churches are the back seats. So the earliest people get those ones. In James's day, if you wanted to look more important than you really were, you wanted to look like you had more money than you really did, you could actually go to shops and rent a ring for a day or for an evening or whatever. This is true. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And in fact, you can do things like that. If you're going on a first date and you want to impress her, you can go and rent that convertible. You can go and rent that car for a time. And James, this happened a lot. People want to go to a party. They know they're going to be with some important people, some elite people. And the society was all about rank and social status. So you could go, and for so much money, you could rent some clothes. You could rent a fine ring so that when you walked around, whether it was true or not, everybody believed you to be somebody of importance. And James says, when that guy, when that lady, when that person shows up at your church, you're quick to escort her right to the front, right where any other social setting, any other place, right where they would have sat. But it shouldn't be that way in God's church, James says. And then there's a comparison on that's, it couldn't be any more to the opposite extreme. He says, and also, there comes in a poor man in dirty clothes. If you go back to the original languages, the idea that James is trying to convey with the Greek words that he uses is that this man is the poorest of the poor. This is the guy that probably hasn't showered in a long time. This is the guy that the clothes that he is wearing, even though they're dirty and ragged, is probably the only pair of clothes that he owns. And he too shows up. Imagine he too shows up at your worship service, at your Sunday morning gathering. And maybe they show up on the same day. And so the one guy's escorted to the front. And then shortly after, in walks this guy, the poor man, the guy in the dirty clothes. And James says, and you pay special attention to the one wearing the fine clothes. You sit in a good place. And you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit down by my footstool. This is interpreted, this means that. You just sort of go off into the background. You hide away. You go somewhere where hopefully nobody will really notice you. Hopefully somebody will not smell you. Hopefully somebody will not complain that you're here. Because we really don't want you to be here. But it's a church, and how can you tell people you can't come? And so James is saying, when you give one man special attention, you say to the guy or the lady in the dirty, torn, worn-up clothes, you say, well, before anybody notices, you just go over there. Just go in the corner, just sit in the back, and if we're lucky, you'll be the last one to come and the first one to leave, and nobody will even see that you're here because everybody will be so focused on the person in the front. You say, go over there and sit at my footstool. In other words, I've looked at you, I've seen you, I've seen how you dressed, and you have nothing to offer me. You're not the kind of person I want to hang out with. You're not in our social group. You're not in our social class. You're economically a little down the ladder than we are at this kind of a church, this kind of a gathering. And so we'll say you're welcome here, but the reality is you're not really welcome here. And the first Sunday you miss, or when you decide not to come back anymore, deep in our hearts, we'll be glad that you didn't come back. Look at verse 4, if you would, again. This is a question that James asks us. Verse 4, he says, "Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil motives?" At that moment, it's natural, and this isn't a bad thing, as we see people, as we notice people and notice different things about them. Yes, we make judgments, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what James is saying, what James is concerned about, is that the judgments about how they perceive people and how they look at people are influencing the way that they treat people and the way that they act. And James is saying, the moment you do that, the moment you say to the rich person, you sit here, or the poor person, you sit there, the place not honorable, he says, you have made yourself, you have become judges with evil motives. With evil motives. And here's a question for you that I want to talk about this morning. And it's going to be on a slide here for you so that you can jump to it. This is the question. When we try to ascertain someone's value based on their appearance, we usurp God's role as the judge. When we try to ascertain his people based on their looks, based on the way they act, based on the way that they come and present themselves into a congregation, but based on their appearance, we usurp God's role as the judge in these situations. And James is saying, you're setting yourself up to be over everyone. You're setting yourselves up to take the place of God and saying, well, that person is this, and that person is this, and that person is this, and that person is this. James is saying, you're essentially playing God, because that, in judging the heart and seeing underneath everything, that is the role of God. And he says, you're becoming judges with evil motives. One of the basic and most important things, messages and points about the gospel that we have to understand, that regardless of anything about us, is that we have nothing to offer God that is a fair trade for our salvation. We have nothing. And it doesn't matter how rich we are or how poor. It doesn't matter, what kind of family we grew up with. We have nothing to offer God that is a fair trade for his death on the cross, for him taking our sin. And so the teaching of the gospel, the key point of the gospel, is that all may come, because nobody has anything that's worthy to trade. Any may come freely, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they came from, regardless of their past, regardless of anything in their lives. Any may come to Christ and receive salvation through faith and in confession of sin in Jesus Christ. And it's not limited to just a few people of a certain race or a certain gender or a certain economic status, but all may come. Way back in Genesis, if you go back to the very first chapters when it talks about the creation of the man and the creation of the woman, one of the most important verses that we just carry through with us from the Old Testament into the New Testament is this: all of mankind, all people were made and created in the image of God. And so regardless, again, of your past, regardless of rich, poor, regardless of where you're at, all people are created in the image of God. Therefore, all people are equal. And so why do we try to ascertain someone's value or judge someone's value and judge how we should treat them and whether they're worth going the extra mile for, whether they're worth spending our money on, or whether we're worth really welcoming them into our community, into our church? Why do we do those things? Because when we do those things, we set ourselves on making distinctions where God has not made distinctions? Why do we insist on making distinctions where God has not made a distinction on how we should treat one another? James is saying, church, for you guys in your community, this is a problem. And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Look at verses 5 and verse 6, and we're going to just go over these quickly. And I just want to make a couple points. He says, "Listen, my beloved brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and the heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him?" Now, what it's saying, or what it sounds like it's saying, is that God actually favors the poor over the rich. But you have to understand a couple of things. James is making a very broad statement here. Most of the people that had come to faith in James' time, the church as a whole, was made up by poor people. And it's not that all of them were poor. In fact, we read in the Bible of some Christians that were followers of Jesus and were very wealthy. But as a whole, it's kind of a broad statement. Many of the people in James' time that made up the New Testament church were on that lower kind of economic standard or economic scale in his day. And so what James is saying is that as a whole, the church is made up mostly of poor people. And if God has chosen them to inherit the kingdom, not because they are poor, but because they are the ones who generally have repented of their sin and come to Christ. And so he's saying he's chosen the poor to inherit the kingdom because they're the ones that have repented and come to Jesus. Again, not all of them, and it's not that no rich people had done that, but mostly it was the poor. And then James just kind of puts out one of those kind of ironic things that just gets your mind thinking. And he says this, "But you have dishonored the poor man." This is verse 6. "Is it not the rich who oppresses you and personally drags you into court?" We've talked about this before. In James's day, in this culture, the rich had all the advantages when it came to the lawsuits and courts to settle things. It was not hard to find a judge that could be bought off, and if you were rich, you had the money to do that. So if you needed a judgment, it was really, really, really easy to take advantage of the poor person. And so James is saying, it's kind of ironic when you think about it, that the people that you are honoring in your congregation, that you are putting on a pedestal in your congregation, are the people that are constantly you're at odds with. Are the people that are constantly taking you to court, are the people that are constantly taking advantage of you. And it's just like, wow, it's kind of strange that as soon as they come into your church, you're catering to them, you make sure they're comfortable, they get the air conditioner. Everything is just worked around them. But the people who are mostly like you and the people that are different than you, or, well, I guess not different, really more the same, are the people that you are ignoring. They're the ones that are dragging you into court, James would say. So why are you catering to them in your congregations? We don't have that problem in our churches today, do we? We don't have that problem. I mean, you think about it, as a society, we have come a long ways, thankfully, into equal treatment of different groups and different peoples. And we've moved the dial on that in the last, few years, and really last longer than that, 40, 50 years, a great deal. But we don't have similar issues in our churches today that James is addressing back in that time. Do we? Do we welcome people of all backgrounds, of all struggles, despite their past, despite the things that they are going through, despite the things that they have been through? Do they feel welcome in our community? And one of the things that churches struggle with, and we just have a hard time with this, is we often think that we're more welcoming than we really are. We think that we welcome everyone, but oftentimes behind the scenes, in various ways, maybe even unintentionally, we communicate to people, again, not necessarily on purpose, that this really isn't the place for you. This really isn't the place where you can ask your questions. This really isn't the place where we welcome your type. This isn't really the place where you can come and, oh, sure, you can sit in the pew, but you can really be involved and really be connected and really be a part of our church family. Do we communicate to people today that they are not welcome in our communities? Do we unknowingly cater to those that are like us, those that sort of fit into the type of people that we are, those that think the same way that we think? One of the most frustrating but productive things that you can do as a person to help you grow and to help you really be a true follower of Jesus is to surround yourself with people that are so different than you are. And I realize that as a pastor and as a leader, and it's easy to surround myself with people that think the same way because things get done quicker and act the same way and just do things the same way, but that's just isolating ourselves. We have to find a way to surround ourselves and to welcome into our churches and our boards and our places of worship and our places of community people that are very, very, very different than us. So here's just a couple last questions, and we have a video clip we're going to show you this morning. I want you to think about these. Do you seek out those, or do we seek out those who are different from us? Do we? Seek out, that's the key word there. Do we seek out? Because the truth is that we need to go and find them. We need to go and connect with them. We need to go and be a part of their lives because it's unlikely that they will come and seek us out. Do we seek out those that are different than us? Do we cast people aside? Do we cast people aside and say, you know what, oh sure, you can come and you can show up and we'll talk nice to you and we'll put a smile on, but really from your appearance and the way that you act and the way that you talk, if we're completely honest about it, we don't really see a whole lot of value there. We don't see a whole lot of potential. We don't see a whole lot of opportunity. You're just so different than us. And so in so many ways, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, we cast people aside. We write them off. We size them up and then we judge them. And say, you know what, I just don't think it's going to work. Final question, do we treat people differently based on what they have rather than who they are in the eyes of God? Do we treat people differently based on what they have rather than who they are in the eyes of God? When you have two people, are we more likely to go the extra mile for that one that we know contributes a lot to the church and the ministry here? And say to the other one, you need some help here too, and we'll do what we can, but really we're not going to put any extra effort or energy into that. Do we treat people differently based on what they have rather than who they are in the eyes of God? Because what God says, and what James is trying to point out to the church, is that everyone is important and everyone is equal and everyone is formed in God's image. And so everyone has infinite worth to God. Do we treat everyone as a church, as individuals, as we go to our workplaces and communities, as if they have, because they do have, infinite value to God? Or do we cater to the ones with the shiny clothes and the gold rings and the nice watch and the nice car and the nice home? I'm going to show you a video clip this morning as we finish off. It's 8 minutes long. The quality is not like 100%. It's not too bad. But just listen to the story. It's Pastor Jim Simblad. He tells a story to his church, and it's an engaging clip. Folks, it's a convicting clip, okay? And it is convicting. So I want you to listen through it. This will be the last part of our sermon here this morning. And I want you to think about it deeply, and I want you to engage in it this morning. So here we go.
I had a crisis event happen to me in our previous facility on